Joining us now is Daniel Freed. He's former US ambassador to Poland to discuss the growing possibility of a US military strike on Iran and the evolving balance of power in Ukraine as it defends against a Russian aggression. Ambassador Freed, welcome to the programme. Thank you for taking the time.
Good evening.
Good evening to you. So before we move on to those topics, I just wanted to get your view on the Supreme Court's decision on the authority of President Trump to impose those global tariffs. What impact do you think that this striking down of that decision is going to have on President Trump's economic policy?
President Trump will still have authorities to impose tariffs. But what the Supreme Court struck down was essentially Trump's authority to impose any tariff on any country at any time for any reason. The existing authorities that Trump can now use are more specific. They're either time limited or require specific findings of specific harms to which tariffs are a remedy. In other words, Trump can no longer use tariffs as a weapon of choice at his will, which an authority he apparently never had and certainly was abusing. So it is a defeat for Trump, and it was one that was foreseeable. Using the statute for sanctions to impose tariff was always questionable, and the Supreme Court decision was strong.
Understood, but it's good news for small businesses as well, is it not? Because they'll be getting some refunds on the tariff deposits that they've paid, which will help a lot of these small businesses get out of a hole. That's true, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure what the administration's plans are to repay the money collected. That's going to be a long process, and I suspect the administration will slow it down and complicate it. The problem with the administration's use of tariffs is that it was so capricious and so unpredictable that it was hard for businesses to plan. Tariffs against Brazil for political reasons, tariffs against China, tariffs rescinded against China, no tariffs against Russia. It was all over the map. Businesses like certainty. And perhaps now, when all the shouting and arm waving is done, the administration will have a more consistent and predictable tariff policy because it will be limited by specific laws. At least I hope so.
Understood. I'd like to move on now, Mr. Ambassador, to Iran. A big military build-up in the region. President Trump is saying, well, they've got 10 to 15 days in which to come to an agreement, or there will be some bad outcomes, and negotiations are going on. How likely is it, do you think, that the US will strike Iran?
There is a significant chance, certainly. Look, last June, the United States did attack Iranian nuclear sites. Trump said that those attacks were so successful that the Iranian nuclear program was obliterated. His words, obliterated. Turns out that's not true, as many critics suggested. The problem is, do you go after the nuclear facilities? If so, what are the odds of success? Do you go more broadly? What are the consequences? It is easier to start a war than to end it. But the Trump administration attacked Iran back in June, and Iran did not significantly retaliate. So there is some room for the administration to put pressure on Iran, and it is doing so in the service, it says, of a negotiated settlement on Iran's nuclear program. So there is a chance that this could actually work out. There is also a chance, I'm afraid, of escalation, and the Trump administration has not decided what it's going to do. Right now, we are in a phase of what I would call coercive diplomacy, pressure tactics to force Iran to make a deal.
Understood, but this time it's slightly different, isn't it, Ambassador? Because this time, I mean, President Trump has not made a secret of the fact that he wants regime change in Iran. So we've got the mullahs and we've got the IRGC with their backs against the wall. And if President Trump does order a strike, then what's the danger that Tehran is going to retaliate, perhaps through the use of its proxies, attack American assets in the region and further afield?
The odds are high that Iran will indeed attempt to retaliate. Whether they succeed, I can't say, but this is an obvious response by them. But it's not as clear to me that Trump wants regime change. He chose not to go for regime change in Venezuela. The Trump administration is divided, of course. It's a very loose coalition of competing elements. Some of them are in favor of regime change, others are not. And Trump himself keeps calling on Iran to make a deal. He's not calling for regime change. Of course, you're right that others have called for regime change. But it may be that Trump is threatening regime change, but will settle for a nuclear deal.
Understood. Now, how do you think the Arab countries surrounding Iran are likely to react? Because it's surely not in their interest for Iran to have nuclear weapons, is it?
The Arab countries have wanted the U.S. to take Iran down a notch for some time, and they want the U.S. to take the risks for taking Iran down a notch. They're not going to be sympathetic to the Iranian regime, but they're not going to want to stand in the way. The U.S. is going to have to assume the risks. And this is a tough one for Trump. He likes quick, decisive military campaigns. He could yet get one, but with military action, there is the danger of unforeseen consequences.
Indeed, there often is in this sort of situation. Now, I'd like to move on to another topic. In a recent interview on TVP World's On the Record, Finnish Prime Minister Stubb spoke about the situation in Ukraine. Let's hear what he had to say.
We need to negotiate a peace agreement and stop this war. I think President Trump is correct on that. But now I think most of the cards are actually with Ukraine. Look, this war has been a strategic failure for Putin. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian, it became European. He wanted to stop NATO from enlarging, he got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep European defense expenditure down, we're going up to 5%. Militarily, he's losing on the battlefront. He's not advancing, and when he advances, Ukraine advances somewhere else. So this has been a military disaster for Russia. And thirdly, his economy is doing badly.
Right. Well, what do you make of that, Mr. Ambassador? Because he's saying, you know, Russia's not doing very well, but he also said later on in that interview that Ukraine is holding a stronger hand. Would you agree?
President Stubb is a wise man, and I usually find myself in agreement with him. I mostly am here too, but I would say this. Putin still thinks he can win because he thinks there's a possibility that the United States will abandon Ukraine or that Europe will break in the face of Russian pressure. However, Stubb is right that Ukraine has held off the Russians and Putin has not succeeded. Let's back up. It's 4 years of the war. That's longer than the war between Stalin and Hitler, 1941 to 1945. It's almost as long as World War I. This is a big war for Russia, and big wars can have big consequences. If Russia loses, Putinism will be discredited, and it could be in danger. We have an opportunity to succeed, to help Ukraine and help ourselves and help the free world. And I hope we do. I think President Stubb is of a similar mind, though I won't speak for him. The problem is and this is mainly on the United States, we are not using all the assets available. We have tools to To put it bluntly, we have some clubs lying on the table. We should pick them up and use them. Additional sanctions going after the Russian Ghost Fleet, additional weapons for Ukraine, and a clear message that I hope would come finally from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. Enough stalling, do the deal, a ceasefire in place, security for Ukraine, or we are coming after, and we have the power to make that stick.
Indeed, a strong message indeed. Ambassador, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time.
Thanks
have a good day.
Me.
Bye-bye now. Right, so please stay with us for World Brief. That's coming right up. But from me, that's all for the moment. Goodbye.